Welcome to the Republican Professor. This morning we have with us Dr. Paul Franks.
Hello, good to be here.
Yeah, good having you. Thanks for being on today.
Yeah, it's nice. I've been watching several of your previous interviews and stuff. Find them really interesting. So it's good of you to ask me to join you.
Yeah,
Looking forward to our time together.
Okay, so you were the one that was watching. Okay, got it.
I watched a lot, so I really got the clicks up for you.
Oh, great. Yeah. We haven't had the money to buy the computers for the unique views.
Oh, right.
I don't know how else people get them. Like, it's just so expensive to get all those computers. And then
yeah, that's the next round of funding. You'll be able to do that, right?
It just takes a long time to go from different locations, and just plane tickets,
gas prices
like
is high too.
Yeah. Well, you're joining us from a different country, right, than America.
That's true. I am in Toronto, Canada.
Okay.
I'm originally from Oklahoma, and then did my undergrad in Texas, and then you and I met out in California.
Mm-hmm.
But since 2008, my wife and I, and now our three boys, have lived here in Toronto. So,
wow. Yeah, do you live in the city then proper, or is it like
no
a suburb area?
Yeah, about maybe 45 minutes or so north of Toronto proper. So
wow.
The school that I teach at, Tyndale University, it's in Toronto itself, but it's like right on the northern edge of it, of Toronto. So.
And Tyndale, is that a Muslim school, or is that
I've never heard this term before coming to Tyndale, but we consider ourselves trans-denominational. And apparently there's a difference between that and interdenominational. I don't know what
were they using the word trans more than 20 years ago?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
In 2008, when I got there,
I think I know what they mean by that.
So,
okay.
Yeah. So there's no official hooks into any. There's partnerships with various denominations and things like that, but not official connections to the institution, which is it's kind of interesting because it allows a pretty wide group of people to be there. It's not just everybody has one specific creed, which is I think interesting, and it makes it easier for people to actually say what they believe and to have good conversations whenever you don't have the watchdogs from some denomination scouring everything every professor says, like you might get at some kinds of schools.
Jeez. Yeah. So you're saying it's in Toronto?
Yeah.
So you mean like there's tall buildings and you feel like you're in a city when you're there?
Yeah, well, so not, I mean, no, Tyndale, so because Tyndale's on the northern edge of it, it's starting to get into the more of the suburban type of a feel. And it's on a really big pastoral like campus, it's just, I can't remember how many acres it is. So there's lots of woods and stuff like that. So where we're at, it feels more like a Oxford College type of a feel.
That's cool.
But it's where the subway is a mile from us, and then you're in the heart of Toronto. So it's kind of that right in that little border area between.
Do you drive in, or do you take a train? Okay.
Yeah, where I'm at, the transit's not great,
like?
so it's terrible.
Oh, okay.
The traffic's like it's I wouldn't say it's as bad as LA traffic. But it's not fun.
That's not very specific.
Yeah, that's a pretty low bar.
Like, well, purgatory, it's not quite like hell, but
yeah. So
cool.
No, it's you avoid it when you can, but it's.
What's the weather like today?
Mid 50s.
Oh.
So this is
green.
It's normally warmer by now, but
any green yet?
Yeah, we have some green. Nobody's mowing their lawns just yet, but that's probably another couple of weeks away.
It's not because they're lazy.
No, there's no reason yet.
Oh, okay.
But
maybe I'm glad you said that.
Maybe it's not only because they're lazy.
I was just assuming you're just saying Canadians are just a bunch of lazy bastards. I got it. Okay, no, so there's no grass. Okay. What about the birds?
Yeah.
What kind of birds do you got up there? You got nice bird songs yet? Springtime?
Yeah, we have a little bird feeder in the back, and we get some finches and cardinals, and every once in a while a blue jay. Cool. Yeah, kind of this basic North America, northeastern parts of the US.
You have songbirds though yet?
I wouldn't know if I did. I have birds that are making noises in my backyard, but I don't know. I'm not much of a birder, so
You just
I
gave
don't
us the
really.
title for the episode: "Birds That Make
Yeah,
Noises."
they
The
do it.
backyard of Paul Franks.
There we go.
So you enjoy it there at Tyndale?
Yeah, I really do.
Good
It's
colleagues.
whenever I first started interviewing or started thinking about coming to Tyndale, I actually talked with one of our former professors, Gary Deweese, about Tyndale, and I owe him a big debt of gratitude for connecting me with my current colleague, Rich Davis, and Gary. Said to me whenever I was asking him about the school, he said, "I can't imagine you would ever be able to find a colleague better than Rich Davis." And for almost 14 years now, that's certainly been true. He's just a man of God. He loves God. He's a really outstanding philosopher, really an encourager, and has led our department really well. We sort of take turns being department chair, going back and forth. It's just a two-person department. But even whenever I'm officially the chair, like he provides just such leadership to the students and to a lot of our colleagues. It's been really, really great. And so I think that's been one thing that I've really loved about Tyndale. And the other part that is unique is it's a small Christian liberal arts school. Like we have maybe a little over 500 or so undergraduate students. There's a seminary as well that has a little bit more, a little bit larger number than that, but it's a pretty small school. But it has a kind of a feel from what many U.S. schools do. But what's I think really unique is a lot of schools in this, not just in the States, but I think in North America, sort of force their faculty to choose between are they going to focus on research, or like, is this going to be a quote unquote research school where that's the main thing that faculty are required to do? Or is this going to be a teaching school where they don't care about research and then you just have to do a bunch of teaching? And Tyndale, I think, has been really admirable in how they've said you don't have to choose between those. And so they provide a lot of support for faculty to do their research, but teaching is a big part of what we do as faculty, and we recognize that input to students. So there's that sort of, I think a lot of institutions have developed this false dichotomy that if you care a lot about teaching, then you can't have any research expectations, or if your research expectations are so high, you just get a bunch of grad students to do all of the teaching, and there's no. And whereas at Tyndale, we've really gone down the middle. And so that's been something that I didn't, really know that going into, whenever I took the job back in 2008. But it's something that I learned pretty quickly. I remember at our first faculty meeting of the year, we went around the room and all of the faculty members were sort of sharing some of their research projects and things like that. And hearing, all of the things that people were doing, I thought to myself, like, okay, I've got to really stay on it. I got to make sure my research is, up to snuff, or I'm going to look like a loser amongst all of my colleagues. But then as I got to know them, they clearly also really deeply care about their time in the classroom as well. And so I think that's been probably the thing that I still appreciate each and every day, being a faculty member there, is just that support to do research. They value it. They care about it. They'll fund sabbaticals and conference grants and things like that. But then there's also a recognition that we're primarily there to invest in the lives of our students. That's why the institution exists.
How useful do you think is the classroom time for students?
I think
are students distracted?
Yeah.
Do they have computers out? Do they have their phones out?
Well, I mean, because we're in Ontario and in Canada, the last couple of years, we've done everything online, and so we still haven't had a full.
Do you allow computers in the online classroom?
Well, I tried to ban them, but then I ran into some hurdles with participation. Kind of went through the floor, but. So when I think back a few years ago when we were in the classroom, I actually, for my first and second year courses, don't allow laptops in the classroom, and students hate that, and they look at me like I'm crazy. But I'm
giving you a double thumbs up.
Yeah, but I can actually, I have my grades, and I could go back and look at the year that I banned laptops, and just there was just a steady, like the curve just improved across the board. Not everybody got A's all of a sudden, but people who were getting C's were now getting, B minuses and B's. Like that kind of, you just saw that kind of a jump. And the classroom.
Were you tracking the same exact students, or you?
Well, no, I was sort of just having to look from afar, looking at the general distribution. Like before it, the curve looked pretty similar. And then after the curve looked pretty similar,
Gotcha.
just it was higher,
Right.
But the other thing I actually did that helped a lot was I stopped using PowerPoint slides myself and just went back to writing everything on the board. And both of those things combined, I saw a lot more interaction with students during the class. I don't know.
Did you say just the first 2 years you banned the laptop?
Yeah. And so, I feel like by the time they're in their third or fourth year, they're probably a little bit more equipped. And so, if they want to screw off those years, they're probably it's too late to save them. But for the first few years, I want them to learn the actual skill of listening and deciphering and learning how to figure out what is worth writing down. Whenever not only are there distractions whenever people have their computers, but they also spend all of their time just typing everything I say, and they're not actually engaging their mind to think about what I'm saying. No. That was the same thing with overhead slides. Whatever they saw on the slide, they would just write it down and not think about it. And so one class, I actually had a slide that it went up and it said, "You don't need to write this down." And then I just watched how many people were writing it down. And then they got midway through and they realized, and they kind of started to chuckle and look up at me. And that's when I thought, the slides are actually, I think, a barrier for them actually being able to engage and think and entertain the ideas I'm saying. They're just focused on writing down whatever they see on the screen. They're not thinking about it.
And so whenever I got rid of that.
Yeah.
That was such a basic thing. It's stuff that you and I maybe take for granted. I don't know how old you are, but at least when I was going through, it just was not even an option to take notes on a computer.
When I started at Talbot, that would have been in 2002. I had a Palm Pilot that had a fold-out keyboard that you could dock on, and I clacked away on notes on that. Geez, and then it was too cumbersome, so I went. That didn't last too long, but all my undergrad, I don't even think it was an option really to take a computer to class.
Yeah. So you had to learn. That's really interesting and insightful. You had to learn what to prioritize as far as your notes. And it is hard when you have a strong lecturer. Well, let me rephrase that. When you have a speedy lecturer, a speedy lecturer isn't always a strong lecturer. I think a strong lecturer is a fuller concept. One that,
I'd agree with that.
Slows down enough for you to pick up what's important by hand if you're writing it by hand. So you said no PowerPoints. Is that the whole for everybody?
Yeah, the only class I still do them now is for my critical reasoning class. And it's mostly just because it's so much faster to put a passage on a screen and then diagnose the passage. But even that, I'm thinking about getting away from it in some way, because I still think it's would be better for not, but outside of that, all of my classes are free of PowerPoint slides. Cool. And students, what's also great is I stopped getting emails asking me to post my slides, because I used to not do that either. And so, but if I don't use them at all, then there's no slides to post. So I don't have to field those questions anymore either.
Because then what's the point of taking notes?
Why come to class if you can just get your professor's notes afterwards?
I know. It's all about incentives. That's awesome. I'm glad to hear you're studying that stuff. Yeah, you're still a student of the classroom. So I think you have to be a student of the classroom. Any effective teacher has to pay attention to that kind of thing, I think.
Yeah, I think that's right.
That's cool. What kind of classes do you teach? What's your load? What's your teaching load?
I feel sometimes a little embarrassed to tell this to my American friends, but most schools like Tyndale in Canada have a 3-3 teaching load. And so, whereas in the States, they would often be 4 and 4, or sometimes even more. And so my teaching load is pretty consistent. In the fall, I usually do 2 sections of Intro to Philosophy and a section of Critical Reasoning.
So it's a 3-3?
Yeah. And don't tell anybody, but our semesters are also only 12 weeks long.
Okay.
And so
we'll edit that out.
Yeah. So that's why I said this is actually part of why I think it's so many faculty are able to focus on their research, is because we're done teaching in the middle of April and don't start again until after Labor Day. And so there's a huge time period in the summer where you can actually work on your research projects, without even having to go the extra step of applying for a sabbatical. And so that's really, really helpful. And
but
it's something
you can't have guns.
Not easily. Not easily. I've just learned.
Is there a process for? Oh, really?
There is. I actually am I had, it's called a possession and acquisitions license.
Okay. That's the official.
That's the official one. And
if you want to,
if you want to own a handgun, you have to get the restricted possession and acquisition license. And I actually went through that course over the summer. And it was the standard possession, the standard PAL course was 10 hours of classwork on a Saturday, no range time or anything like that. Like it wasn't even at a range. It was just in a classroom.
And this is for the basic possession, or the
just restricted? For the basic. Yeah, just for the basic. And then if you want the restricted, you got to come back another day for another 8 hours, where they just talk about restricted guns, which are almost not solely, but almost exclusively handguns.
So just 8 hours.
So it's 18 hours of course
class time about?
A lot of it is regulations, like how to properly store them, how to transport them. I mean, they do stuff about how they function as well, like, different actions and things like that. And then the instructor, brought in several handguns, and the day before, shotguns and rifles. And so, you have to show that you can, how to load it properly and unload it. And I mean, it was a fine course. It was just really long, and thankfully we had a good instructor. Talking about being a student of the classroom, our instructor was really good at that.
Oh, that's good.
And so that made it at least interesting.
Is that a private contractor, or was that
so they sort of hire it out to people? It's the federal government oversees it.
Gotcha.
So it's funny, you take the course and you do your tests, and then the instructor takes the tests and mails them off to some other government agency, and then they verify it or do something and give their stamp, and then they mail it to you, and then you fill out your paperwork and mail it off to the RCMP, and then the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the Mounties. It's kind of like
do they actually ride horses?
Some of them do. Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah. It's sort of like the Canadian FBI. Like it's sort of the federal, it's a federally, has a federal jurisdiction,
but they oversee.
Yeah. They oversee. I'm sure there are things that aren't quite parallel between that comparison, but it's similar. But they oversee the Canadian Firearms Program, I think is what it's called, where they issue all of these things. So between the time that
you have to ask for permission to have a gun. You have to ask you have to go to the king and say, "Please, sir, can I have a weapon for self-defense?"
That's it. Yeah. And
gotcha.
To own I now have a handgun, and basically I wanted to get one because the certain parties in Canada are starting to talk about banning handguns like entirely. And so
hold on
sure.
For a sec. I'm interested in the cost of this. How much does this cost?
I think it was $300 for both courses, maybe.
So 150 per course, something.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Okay. Something close. I think it's actually like 200 for the one, and then 100 for the restricted one, or something to that effect.
How much is that? How much is that? Does that go directly to the government, or does that go to the direct party responsible for teaching?
I think it goes primarily to the teacher. Maybe they get a cut of it, I don't know, but I think it primarily goes to the person running the course. Because when I was looking around, different people charge different amounts, and so, but there's kind of a sort of a standard minimum that they all have a kind of agreed on, either by some law I'm aware of, or just by common agreement. They all like around 300-ish was about the lowest that I could find.
And then, so then how did you get the handgun? Do you go to a dealer that's approved? Is there a gun store? How's that work?
Yeah. So there's gun stores, and you don't really know that they exist, because they At least the ones around here, they don't stand out. Like I drove past one store for 10 years before I learned that it was a gun store.
Really?
So
Wow.
so I go in and
well, what
I
did you
have to
think
have,
it was? A barber shop or something? Or?
well, it's all of their windows are like covered. And so
Jeez.
I only know of 2 gun
How
stores,
melodramatic.
and both of them have the same thing. So I don't know if that's a way of them.
Just this right here makes it sound like Canadians are so afraid of other Canadians. Just to me, that's what it sounds like.
It's the typical guns have cooties mentality.
Okay.
And so
we're familiar with that down here as well in California.
Yeah. Especially handguns. Handguns have extra cooties. There's a real allergy to them here. But I mean, what's
that word
cooties
because it brings me back to elementary school.
That's right. Yeah.
Which I think is your point.
There's a really vibrant like hunting community in Canada, as you would imagine, like the Great North here.
Yeah.
And so
really beautiful there. Wow, amazing.
Yeah, it's there's just all of these regulations that have sort of been folded in over time. And I took my course in September of last year. And
it's really awesome that you did that. I'm really glad to hear that.
I think I picked up my firearm in February, so it was about a 6-month process.
Whoa.
Yeah. So you go in and you go into the store and you show them your ID, your restricted PAL, and then once you purchase it, then they hold on to it, and then they send off paperwork to the RCMP to initiate the transfer.
What's a PAL stand for? Restricted
Possession and Acquisitions License. So to own or acquire a gun, you have to have a PAL.
Gotcha. Okay.
So like if I got hit by a bus tomorrow, my wife would have a limited amount of time to either get a PAL for herself or get rid of all of my guns, because she doesn't have one, so she can't even possess one. And so it's really pretty stringent. But then you're gonna love this. Whenever they call me and they said, so it took about 6 weeks, and they say, okay, the initiation is complete, you can come and pick up your handgun. Okay, so I get it, and they give it to me in a case. They have a little lock that they put on it because you have to transport it in a locked case, unloaded in a locked case. And then I drive home. Legally, I'm not allowed to go anywhere with it until I'm a member at a gun club, and I can go, and I can only legally carry my handgun to a gun club. And that's it, like nowhere else. And so you have to, find which, I went to one gun club near me to see what it cost. And they had a model of governance that they had shares in the club, and there was only a certain limited number of shares. So in order to join the gun club, you had to buy a share. And in order to buy a share, somebody had to be willing to sell their share. And so I drove to see what these shares are going for. And there were 2 posted on the bulletin board, and they were asking $20,000 for a share.
That's a shocker. Yeah, it's a government monopoly.
And then
it's a government sponsored monopoly.
You still have to pay the yearly fee. Like, the annual fee, just like that, the share just allows you to pay to be a member.
It's like taxi cabs and the medallions.
That's exactly what it's like. Thankfully, not all of them have that model. There are other ones that are, more.
Are there any government gun clubs where it's public and you pay $15 and that's it?
Not that I'm aware of.
Shall issue.
Yeah, I don't think so. There's one club that you pay, you could pay $100 or so a year, and that gives you the right to pay them $35 every time you go. Sort of a model.
Are the forests just crawling with police officers? Are they at pretty much every tree?
Yeah.
No. Because the question is the most effective self-defense tool in human history is at your disposal, and you have hundreds and hundreds, thousands of square miles of beautiful forest where there are no bodyguards. There is no protection at all.
Right.
And not to mention, it's just a safe place to go plinking, as I know from growing up in Colorado, from growing up in Oklahoma, and practice the safe and effective, lawful use of your handgun. And yet you're saying that the regime up there would consider you as criminal, as like someone attacking you, if you were prepared to defend yourself.
Yeah, there's lots of really terrible horror stories about this and this actually gets closer into our topic about, dealing with evil and how we think about that. So
that's a great segue too. Wow.
For my handgun that I have to store it in a locked container.
Do you want to say what it is?
Sure.
We're interested.
It's a SIG P320 X full. So
thank you.
You can't. Yeah, you can't get small ones here very easily.
So that's the smallest one you could get. Or did you want a small one?
Well, no, I mean, because you can't carry it, like there's not really a need. You can get some that are a little bit smaller, but there's not really, if you have larger hands, like there's not really a need to, mess with
it. Could you carry it in an emergency? Is there an exception for emergencies?
Not outside my. No.
I mean, if there was a true emergency that everybody agreed was an emergency, it's such an emergency that nobody's sitting there talking about whether it's emergency because people are acting.
Yeah.
It would be helpful to have a smaller one if you had to, if you didn't want anybody to know you were armed.
Yeah, I'm sure people do that, but it's illegal, and so if you're caught with it, then there's big fines and penalties.
Okay, I see. That makes sense. The reason I bring it up is because in the California Penal Code, for example, there is an exception in the penal code for lawful use of a firearm that would otherwise be illegal in an emergency. So, for example, if there's imminent threat to life or serious bodily injury, and I mean, having the weapon on you in an illegal place, it's just so convoluted. But I mean, if you had legal access to it, and there was an emergency happening. So in other words, let's say that's why the firearm storage laws are so important in public, because California is, if you don't have a concealed carry license, you can only, for talking about handguns, you can only transport it in a locked container unloaded. Right. And a trunk counts as a locked container. That's specifically in the California Penal Code.
So it doesn't have to be in a container. It can just be in the trunk.
The glove compartment is specifically not. So they go out of their way to say the console and the glove container is not. But a trunk is, and there are private.
What about a frunk? And the new Ford F-150, the all electric one, it has a frunk.
That would count.
That would be okay. So that would
that would count. Yeah, they make an exception for trucks. They had to do that.
Okay.
And also, SUVs, because there's no trunk, right? So you have to figure out. So there's kind of these awkward workarounds, but private companies have come up with essentially car safes that are, it's like a little safe, and you can legally transport it as long as it's unloaded. And separated from the ammunition, and no one knows what that means. But anyway, but no, if you're driving and you have the weapon on you, legally transporting it, and then there is an earthquake, or there's some kind of riot, or there's some kind of really real emergency, like you see a woman being attacked, then you could use that firearm in defense of life, property.
I'm not sure what the rules are, the laws are in those cases here. I suspect it would be like, so if I needed to have a gunsmith take a look at my handgun before I could drive it to the gunsmith, I literally have to phone the RCMP.
You have to ask for permission.
Get an authorization to transit is the term, an ATT, and say I'm taking it to no, it's free, but you do have to tell them when you're taking it, the location, and then they'll give you a certain range, for you to be able to return home from it. And so I imagine if you were out driving and say you were on the way to a gun range and then there was something that came up and you would definitely want to invest in law, gun owners insurance sorts of things. So you could have a lawyer who's aware of the rules there, because I suspect they wouldn't treat you very kindly. One guy was charged with how do you like this for reasoning? So somebody was on his property throwing Molotov cocktails at his house. He runs and gets his gun. I'm not sure if it was it
was at his own house?
I think it was a handgun. What's that?
He was throwing it at his own house?
No, a guy was, he was home and somebody was throwing these things at his house.
Oh, okay. So it was an attack.
So he grabs his gun and fires 2 warning shots and they run away. He was charged with illegal storage because they determined he was able to get his gun and ammunition so quickly that he couldn't have followed the proper storage laws because he got them too quickly. Thankfully, they ended up dropping charges.
You're not allowed to clean your own gun in your home.
Well, that's actually a big question under the law here is when is it in use? Like, when is it being used? And so if you're in the middle of cleaning a gun and then you go to answer the door, and it's the police and they walk in and they say, "Oh, your gun's laying out here." Do you have to lock it in your safe before you go and answer the door? And that's actually a question that's not been settled by the Canadian courts here about what counts as legal, or what counts for you to use it. So yeah, it would definitely, it would be wise if you were ever thinking that you might use your firearm in a situation like that, especially outside of your home. You would want to make sure you have some insurance to help you cover some of your lawyer's fees. Yeah. Now, these are all restrictions for the handguns. For shotguns and rifles, it's a little bit like for transport, it just has to be unloaded. For storage, it's got to be unloaded.
Can you take your rifle or shotgun outside of the home legally?
Yeah. So you can only legally, discharge it in places where you're legally allowed to discharge it. So, if you're in a forest and hunting is allowed, that would work. If you're on someone's private property and the city limits, or the city, whatever their jurisdiction allows.
Now that's firing. An interesting issue that you cannot take your pistol to someone's large private property where it would be quite undisturbing to other people to, like, in terms of noise, in terms of safety, to shoot, because people in the United States do that all the time. They take the gun to private property to go shoot targets and practice gun safety and gun.
You look at these YouTube videos and the guys are, demonstrating some new, some new 22 that came out or whatever, and they're in their backyard, shooting. It's like, nope, that would not, it would have to be officially approved as a designated firing range, in order to who knows what that would cost. So you can do, shotguns and rifles is different, but handguns are different because they're the bullets that come out of a handgun are different than those that come out of a rifle. So they got to have different rules for it.
Yeah. It is odd. You've probably noticed how odd the structure is. They're worried about handguns in a forest.
Yeah.
That's just weird to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. It would seem like to me, it seems like it would be, well, okay. Where do you start with this stuff? I mean, the basic problem I have with the regime as it's structured is that it criminalizes innocent conduct, and it blurs the line between innocent conduct and criminal conduct. When an innocent person can be charged criminally, there's a problem with that.
Yeah.
And being prepared for self-defense is not criminal. That's not, under the natural law, that's not criminal.
Yeah, I agree. And, it's
merely transporting a gun is not criminal. Possession of a gun is not criminal. It's what you do with it. That's the criminal issue. And we've strayed so far from that basic understanding of what criminality is. We start inventing crimes. No wonder innocent people need lawyers all of a sudden. I mean,
Yeah.
Now I wonder what the lawyers think about this. They probably love it because they're never out of work.
That's
They're
right.
never
That's
out
right.
of work. So
yeah, and what's interesting is, there is a significant amount of gun crime here in Canada, but almost all of the crimes that are committed, they come from firearms that are already illegally obtained, usually through the states. So they come through illegally, and so passing all of these other, like passing more laws restricting what I do with a handgun isn't whenever we were in the class, and the instructor told us about having to call the RCMP to get an ATT in order to transport our handgun from one place to another. A buddy of mine who was taking the class with me, he said, well, is that what all the criminals do too? Do they call the RCMP and say, hey, I'm going to go rob this store over there. Do I have your permission to take my handgun with me? And he just laughed and said, I'm not allowed to talk about politics in the class, but that is a question worth asking. And so,
you mentioned gun crime. That's interesting. Your use of the term. I'm not sure if you were tracking your use of the term. You were using the term in a natural law sense, which is interesting. And I really like that, but I don't know if you were, I don't know if you did that on purpose.
I'm not sure that I did. I don't think I chose
I'll tell you what I'll tell you
over something else.
I'll tell you what I mean by that.
Yeah.
That's usually the way it's used. The word gun crime.
Mm.
The word crime is referring to something immoral, because the regime you just suggested would say that the gun crime would go up. The more laws there are, gun crime goes up, and that's because innocent people now are criminals for doing innocent things. So in other words, you take your gun out at home in the privacy of your own home, that's a criminal offense.
Yeah,
that's,
it could be.
That's gun crime.
Yeah.
If you load your gun just to practice in your own home, that would be a criminal offense. How many times is that happening? Probably all across Canada.
Yeah.
So the gun crime goes up. Now, no one's tracking those statistics necessarily, but it's but every time somebody is concerned for their own safety and they put a handgun in their backpack or something when they go hiking, that's now gun crime.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the way that people typically mean by gun crime, gun violence, whatever you want to say, they mean something immoral. They mean someone is assaulting somebody else, or they mean that there's attempted murder with a firearm. That's what they mean, and that's the moral.
There's a crime that's being committed with the use of a gun, and it's not
immoral.
The crime isn't about the gun,
and it's immoral too.
Yeah,
it's got to be immoral.
Yeah.
Having the gun in your backpack for self-defense is not immoral.
Yeah.
But the regime considers that a criminal offense. But that's the problem with it. I don't like that.
Yeah.
I think my concern is it teaches the young people the wrong lessons about right and wrong too. I think the law does teach, and it teaches adults too, over the long run. So, and I don't like the lessons that it teaches. So, but good for you for acquiring that, going through the process, learning about it. I think there's something very valuable about, you're an American. Everybody knows you're an American probably. And you go through the process. You say, okay, I'm here. I'm kind of a visitor. Are you a citizen? You're not a citizen.
I'm a permanent resident. We've
resident?
Not yet gone through the process of doing citizenship. So,
are you going to stay up there for your whole career then, you think?
We don't have any plans on leaving.
Gotcha.
We've got a great church, and we love our kids' schools, and my wife's doing really well in her job. And so we've
your kids go to public school?
And no, they did for a couple of years, but they're now back at a classical. Two of them are at a classical school, and then one of them, our older one, is at another different Christian school.
Oh.
So yeah, it was great. Classical academies sort of launched for the first time in Ontario right around the time that our kids became school age. So prior to that, there weren't any classical schools anywhere nearby. Now there's a handful of them in the province. So yeah, that's been really helpful. We've really enjoyed that.
That's awesome. Now let's go back to the courses you were teaching.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
You said you had a 3-3 load. You teach intro in the fall, and I think you said 2 intro to philosophy,
and then 1 critical reasoning. That's usually my standard. Sometimes things have to change, but typically that's what I'll do.
That's cool.
And yeah, it's nice because the having the 2 sections of intros keeps the class sizes a little bit smaller, so you have more time to give feedback on essays and things like that, instead of having
what's the class size?
It's usually around 35-ish for the intro courses.
Okay.
So nice. And, so even if it was just 1 class, it's doable compared to what students, some professors at, larger state schools are, but, because Tyndale's has a smaller student body overall, we really try to take advantage of that to the best that we can, and really try to allow professors to get to know their students well. And so then in this we call it the winter term, because it's still winter by the time we finish. So in our winter term, I teach a bunch of, it's kind of a hodgepodge of courses: philosophy of religion. I teach a normative ethical theory course. I teach some seminars on the problem of, I teach a seminar on the problem of evil, one on the metaphysics of free will. This last term, I taught one on the ethics of war, which is really interesting, especially given the Ukraine, war in Ukraine. And then I teach philosophy of mind. I taught a political philosophy course once, but I haven't gone back to it yet because it was just a real chore. That's certainly outside my specialty. I have an interest in it, but I'm not well enough versed in it to have a really solid course for it. So that's probably, I'm going to have to go back to that at some point and really read up on it. And because I think that would be something that would be good for the students. So yeah, so it's kind of a hodgepodge of different courses in the winter term.
I think it'd be cool. I mean, if you ever had an opportunity to do like an elective, I mean, I bet, but you wouldn't be able to do this, but I think it would be cool if you could teach the philosophy of law or something, and have the student go through the acquisition process of a firearm and just talk about it as you go through, compare different ways that different countries do it, and talk about the merits of the Second Amendment versus the other side, and the natural law on self-defense. I think it'd be a very interesting take on criminal law. And of course you could get into other aspects of it too.
We've actually thought with my colleague Rich and I, we've talked about having a philosophy of law course. And then we were like, well, which one of us is going to teach it? And we're like, but that's something that if we could find somebody that could do it for us, then we'd certainly be open to something like that. I think there would be an interest there among our students.
So you grew up in Oklahoma. What was that like growing up in Oklahoma?
I mean, typical suburban life. It was.
What city did you grow up in?
Mustang, Oklahoma. So it's the home of Dennis Byrd, who's played for the New York Jets. Really? There was a Dennis Byrd movie that was made about him once, because he actually was paralyzed during a football game. And then the movie was about his recovery. And so this was back in the 90s. But it was really, really interesting moving story. But it was sort of a rural area. Like, we have sort of, I lived in just a suburban neighborhood, but then like right next to me was a big pasture. You could hear the cows at night, making a racket when you're trying to sleep, that sort of a thing. So it's kind of a mix. So I wasn't out on a farm or anything, but I was, Mustang was like in between a bunch of farms, and then it's the next town, so it was, a smallish, community. But it's probably half an hour west of Oklahoma City. So, there's, city-like things that you could easily get to do and stuff. So it wasn't out in the middle of the sticks.
But by city life, you mean like get some ice cream?
Yeah, you go to the mall or something, go to a movie, or,
you don't mean like go to Broadway or anything like that?
No, not that kind of city life.
Gotcha.
So, yeah.
That's what I figured. Did you go cow tipping?
We never did, actually, but we often talked about it. But
did you grow up around guns, since we already mentioned?
That was the main reason I actually started going through this course, is that my father passed away a few years back from cancer, and he had his hunting rifles and shotguns and things, and I was wanting to take my son's hunting, and so once I decided to kind of get moving on that, I realized, okay, I got to go through all of this process. Now that was really the primary reason.
Were you able to bring those up there?
Yeah, so I was able to do that here recently. So just a couple of some basic shotguns and a rifle and like a black powder gun as well of his. So yeah,
praise God that you were able to. You weren't forced by the Canadians to get rid of that sentimental property that you have.
Yeah. Well, what's actually interesting is on that process, the Canadian getting it into Canada was the easy part. It was going through figuring out what all the rules are for it leaving the US, because there are certain different departments they consider, like, even though it's just, me with 4 or 5, rifles and shotguns, I'm considered an exporter. And so, which, like, they treat me as if I was a business trying to export these things for profit. And, so it took me a while. It ended up not being as cumbersome, but it took me, a good 6 months or so of trying to navigate what rules apply to me and what doesn't. And then eventually I was able to figure out that there are some exemptions that applied that I could use that would prevent me from having to get export licensing and all of that sort of stuff. So it just means I have to keep them. I can't sell them while I'm out here. Like, they have to come back to the States at some point. And so that's fine with me.
What does that mean that when they check they check you at the border and they make sure you have guns?
I'm
like, wait, hold on a second. Pop that trunk. We want to make sure you have guns.
Yeah. So I don't really know how they enforce that, but it's an exception.
Paul, I'm laughing because when I've studied political science, American law for so long, and American politics, and you just have to have a sense of humor, because it's human nature. Human nature. We're sinful.
Yeah.
Most of the time, this stuff is not well thought out. It's just people just shooting from the hip. No,
and then making adjustments as problems come up.
That's
and
exactly what happens.
Longer and
they
longer,
just punt it to the attorneys, and that's not a good way to do it.
No,
but well, it's interesting. You're treated by the U.S. as an exporter. Wow, that's just fascinating. Now, what about if you had inherited your dad's handguns, for example? What?
So it would have been the same process. I just would have to. So whenever with the shotguns and rifles, basically when I got to the border, I just had to show them my PAL. And then, they kind of go through and they check to make sure it's a.
So you had to have that in place already, and that takes 6 months. Did you say?
Yeah. Well,
how long does it take?
It took me from September until February.
To just get the PAL.
Yeah.
That's a long time. Why does it take so long?
Because I've been told that the RCMP
they just stare at your social security card for 6 months, and then they go, okay now,
right,
okay.
I've been told that the RCMP is just really understaffed, partly because of COVID. That they didn't have as many people in their offices. I will say this: I've had to call them a couple of different times to kind of navigate the bringing in of guns to Canada. And every time I've called somebody there, I felt like
first of all, just God bless you when we pray for you, Lord. Please be with Paul in this important work.
I found the people there to actually be really helpful and kind. And I didn't get the impression that they were opposed to people owning guns. They were just administering the program. Like, the people that I talked with are like, oh yeah, well, I've got something similar. Like, they were they were friendly and helpful, but I got the impression that they were understaffed. And that's probably why it took longer than normal.
You had a little bit of a Canadian accent there. You're picking up, when you did their voice, it really did sound Canadian.
Well, I get teased about that from my brother and his wife, especially anytime we go back home.
That was a good impression. That was really good. Wow.
I felt like I was on the phone with them. It was unintentional. And so that makes me worried.
That makes sense, I guess. I don't have any ill feelings toward the Canadian people at all. I mean, every Canadian I've ever met has been a delightful person.
That's the stereotype, and it's that it emerged for a reason. I think they are, kind people.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. I think we could learn a thing or two from them. That's great that you're not being mistreated by people. I mean, the laws are, I think, abusive, but
Yeah.
But wow, amazing process you've had to go through just to learn about the laws.
I feel like I should start like a service. I could be a consultant for others who are going through the same thing, and to like just download all of this now useless information that I have in my head.
That's not a bad idea. Yeah, that's not a bad idea. Well, okay, so I'm kind of jealous that you're able to teach such a cool, predictable schedule. You have your choice of selections, like as an upper level. What are your upper level class enrollments typically like?
It varies, but I would say it's usually around 15 to 20 in the upper level. The seminar, because we really try to design this to feel like a grad school seminar, because a lot of our students actually want to go off to do MA work, and you know, several of them, a lot of them go off and do their MAs and then kind of go get a job doing something else. And then we have a handful that you know, have gone on to do their PhDs. And so we wanted, for those that are interested, we wanted to kind of see what that might feel like. So we cap that at 12. Our seminars are at 12 because it's hard to do that kind of a format, but much larger than that. It's usually around 10 is what we usually get in a seminar, or somewhere in that neighborhood. Every once in a while, I'll have just really large 300 level classes. Like a couple of years ago, I had almost 40 people in my ethics course. I'm like, where are you? Why are you all in this course? Like, where did you come from? You know, but I would say it's normally around in the 20s range, somewhere around there is usually pretty healthy. 15 to 20 is a pretty healthy average size class, and which is great because you really get to know the students, and you know, you can give them a good amount of feedback on their writing, and you know, you have good discussions in the classroom, and it's a really great experience. I think it's one of the real benefits of a Tyndale education, is that sort of like whenever Rich and I sit down to write a letter of reference for a student, like, you know, we've had them, because there's just the two of us, we've had them in a bunch of courses and got to know them really well. So we can actually write, you know, informative letters talking about specific papers that they've written for us, because we oftentimes just remember, oh yeah, they wrote the paper on that topic, you know, and so it's kind of a neat experience.
And those letters go, I think, a lot further if people actually read them, which I think they do, especially if there's a competitive program. Yeah, that's really good. What's the library like? How strong are the holdings in the library?
So every year, this is one of the questions that students get asked on their student evaluations, and I've never seen anyone complain about lack of resources. And I think it's because our library had this really, and COVID kind of shut it down, but basically I could tell the library to put in my mailbox, my on-campus mailbox, various journals. And then I get the journals and I go and in any of the books that are reviewed, I just put my initials by it and then give it back to the library, and they go and get the book and they add it to their collection. And so faculty actually can have a pretty active role in helping the library develop their collection. And our head librarian, Hugh Rendell is his name, is just fantastic. Every time I've emailed him and said, hey, here's a journal, here's a database, you know, I think we could use it. He's said, okay, like he'll find a way to make it happen. And so that it's, you know, we don't have the largest, I'm sure we don't have the largest terms of like collection, like in terms of pure numbers, but I feel like the quality of our holdings are really high.
Wow.
And there certainly has been as much institutional support for developing those things. But I remember when I first came here, you know, he said, hey, would you be interested in, you know, do you want to receive these journals or not? And I was like, sure. And then, you know, it's kind of like you're a kid at the candy store. You're like reading things like, oh, well, I kind of, that looks good. I'd like to read that. Or I think that would be helpful for students. And you just put your initials on it, and then it shows up in the library. And, you know,
what about for volumes? What about for volumes? Do they do the same thing if you want a monograph?
Yeah, basically. Yeah. If it's,
those are more expensive.
You know, yeah. I've never had him tell me that's something that they can't afford to acquire. And so
that's a strong program they have there. That might, I don't know how it is exactly at other programs, but if the faculty have that much of an active role in acquiring, no wonder it's such a high quality.
Yeah,
that's really good. That's really good.
It's been great. Like there was several years ago, I don't know if you're familiar with the Oxford Bibliographies online. Have you heard of this service?
No.
It basically it's peer-reviewed annotated bibliographies of, so you could go, you log in and you can say problem of evil, and then I can't remember who did the problem. I think Quanvig maybe did the problem of evil one, but they're like, really well established, peer-reviewed, and here's all of the main articles or the main books, and with a quick summary of it. And I found out about it and asked our librarians, hey, I think this would be a great resource for our students to help them as they're, beginning their research papers. And he said, yeah, great. So he subscribed to that for the philosophy department, or for the philosophy journal. And then also, I think it was Biblical Studies has it as well. So now Tyndale students can use it for both. So it's that kind of an attitude that if you can, give them some reasons to think that this is something that students would use and would be helpful, then he's certainly been willing to find the budget to make it happen.
That's awesome.
So yeah, it's been really, a real blessing. Even in my own personal research, much less for students, just for me, it's been helpful to be able to go and find the books that I need, or they'll get them for me if they don't have it. So it's been really good.
And I'm looking at your background right now. Is that a real background?
That is a real background. Yeah.
Those are real books. Cool.
Those are real books. So
those are books that you can hold in your hand.
That's right. So this is sort of more of literature books here. Mm-hmm. And these are more theology commentaries.
Looks like, is that the 2 volumes on Luke there?
Yeah.
By Bach?
Yeah, that's the one that people always recognize. Yeah. Daryl Bach's. And then
my first master's degree was on Luke. So I use Bach a lot.
So these are my philosophy books that have found their way home. I
see Copleston. I see some Frederick Copleston.
Yeah. I gotta have it. So these are all ones that are typically at my office. Most of my collection is in my office at school, but because we've been doing everything online, like, every 6 weeks I got to go to the office.
Something else there in the corner there.
Oh yes, that's another.
You don't have to say what it is. That's praise God.
My wife didn't want it in the bedroom, so yeah.
Oh, good for her. Good for her until there's a bump in the night, then she'll change.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, I love the lighting, and I love that color that you have for the wall. It's a really nice shade of blue.
This used to be a nursery, and until COVID happened, and I needed an office. So now we have all 3 boys are sharing a room because I needed somewhere to have a class.
God bless them. How old are your boys?
12, almost 10, and 6. So 12, 9, and 6. That's
an interesting distribution. Well, congratulations.
Yeah.
What a beautiful family.
Yeah. They're fun.
Now, we had you come on because of the problem of evil. I know that you have some thoughts on the problem of evil. You've thought about it. You did your Ph.D. at the University of Oklahoma, I believe.
That's right.
Did you study under Zagzebski, Linda?
That's right.
Zagzebski?
Yeah, she was my dissertation advisor, and so I got to take several courses with her as well, as you might imagine. And so my dissertation was more on. I mean, it was on the problem of evil in general, but it was really looking at the free will defense and aspects of the free will defense and how it is, or if it's compatible with various other kinds of Christian doctrine. So it's interesting. I was struggling to find a topic to write the dissertation on, to really zero in on one, and I happened to write a paper for Linda and on the connection or some tensions between certain conceptions of original sin and certain understandings of free will defense. And so she then said, why don't you just use this as the basis for a chapter and then write a few more chapters on looking at other doctrines? Like, why don't you structure your dissertation around sort of that sort of way? And I was like, that's great, because that interaction between philosophy and theology has always been really interesting to me anyways. And so I just didn't know if that would fly at a public school or not. But whenever your dissertation advisor suggests it, and that's a pretty good person to have in your corner. And so that was the focus of the dissertation then. So it was not necessarily just on, it was sort of say, here's a common response to the problem of evil, but there may actually be some tensions between it and other things that Christians will often hold. And so looked at the nature of are, what free will might look like in heaven, because sometimes people will say,
wow,
you have to, if free will is so important and it's a justifying reason for evil here and now, well, in heaven, heaven's even better than earth.
Yeah,
and there's no sin in heaven, so apparently you don't need free will in heaven. And so how do you make sense of that? Or some have argued that God could have just created us with the same kind of character that he has, and so he's a really good being and he doesn't have to have the ability to do evil. So why wouldn't he just sort of create us with that, give us the necessary knowledge and power to always do what is right, and then you don't have any of the, you get all of the goods from that and none of the evil. So it's those kinds of the nature of divine freedom or freedom in heaven, that kind of stuff. So yeah, it was a really fun project. Actually,
would you mind
go ahead.
Would you mind just giving us the conclusion? Because I think, well, maybe we probably should define some terms after you give us your conclusion, but in case there's somebody listening to this and is wondering where you land on things, just to reassure them. I don't always think that that's the good way to do it, by the way. I'm just saying for this, for purposes of this, would you mind did you lose your Christian faith when you were working through this, or
no? Thankfully not. It would be hard to be a intellectually honest professor at a Christian institution if I had. So thankfully not. And so where I came down on is, there are certain, at least with original sin, I do think that there are certain conceptions of original sin that are incompatible with a free will defense to the problem of evil. And so you have some options then, right? You could give up the free will defense, or you can revise your understanding of original sin. And I don't think either of those requires you to give up your Christianity, and so that's kind of, I think that's probably the most, the one where there's the most sort of maybe internal tension. I think with the other issues, it's just once we have a better understanding of what heaven is, you can see, oh, there is no conflict between it and free will, or you understand like the nature of divine freedom, and if God were to create us in that similar sort of way, there would be something that would be missing. And you say, okay, well, yeah, once you tease out what would be missing, then there's no tension between the free will. But I do think there are tensions between, say, a really strong, so basically, just to give a bit more detail to it, if your version of original sin holds that you are born guilty for Adam's transgression, then I think it's going to be really hard for you to consistently maintain a free will defense to the problem of evil, because the free will defense relies heavily on notions of libertarian freedom, and it's going to be hard to maintain that a libertarian conception of free will in a way that would make it acceptable for someone to be held guilty on behalf of what someone else did. Right. That's where the tension is going to
when you say
emerge.
Libertarian, if someone doesn't know what that term means in philosophy, what's libertarian free will?
Yeah, so it's basically an account of freedom that says that our actions are not determined by things that happened, let's say antecedent conditions, things like the past states of affairs, the laws of nature, those sorts of things don't determine our actions. And so some libertarians think that one of the things that is also goes into it is what they call the principle of alternative possibilities, which means like if any moment you were to engage in an action, if there is no alternative possibilities available to you, then it's not a free action. Right? If there's only one thing that you can do, then it's not a free action. And so that I would say most libertarians probably build into their account of libertarian freedom the principle of alternative possibilities. And you can see if that's your understanding of libertarian freedom, is that you have to have an alternative option, some other. So if you're going to A, you have to be able to B, at least have that as an option, as an alternative there. And if you don't, if you can only A, then it's not a free action. Well, if that's your view, it's really hard to.
Some people are probably just now thinking, wait, there's more than one view of what free will is, and it's like, well, welcome to the party. I know
that's right.
I know it's hard to keep up sometimes if this might be your first exposure to this, or maybe the second or third even. And you're listening to Paul talk and you're thinking, how does he talk so fast? And how does he know all this stuff? Well, just because he spent a lot of time on it. And just when you spend a lot of time on something, just like you could talk about firearms, if you spend a lot of time on it, just like anything, you just pick it up and you learn these concepts and stuff like that. So yeah, the basic issue is that there is more than one view on what free will is. So some people will use the term in different ways, and it's a little bit, it's kind of a pain, but that's why we do philosophy, because we got to figure out which one is the better one.
What also makes it even more difficult is sometimes these terms are also used in different ways in other contexts. Right? So it's somebody like might have heard me say libertarian, and they're like, wait, what?
Ron Paul.
That's right. And so
they're thinking Ayn Rand.
Yeah, right. And so I guess maybe the two broad camps, or I guess whenever the two broadest camps of when it comes to what free will is one view says that free will is doing what you want to do. Like, I mean, this is a very much of a broad, like a super thumbnail sketch. And so you could be free to do what you want to do, and be determined to do what you want to do. So you might say you're determined to want to become a philosopher, and then you are so you want to become a philosopher, and you go off and you become a philosopher, and they say, look, you freely became a philosopher because you're doing what you wanted to do. That would be, again, so this is a group that would be known as compatibilists.
Okay, good.
Right. So
that's not the libertarian.
Yeah. So
that's not the PAP people, the principle of alternative possibilities.
Right. So if there are any compatibilists listening to this, they're not going to like that thumbnail sketch. And so I just ask you to forgive me for just brevity's sake, to just leave it at that for now. There's a lot more that could go into that. But that would be one broad camp. And then the other broad camp would say free will is not compatible with determinism. It's incompatible. So if you're determined to engage in some particular action, then you didn't do it freely. So the compatibilists will say, what's compatible with what? It's how I always like to tell it with students. Well, it's freedom is compatible with determinism, or other contexts, they might say moral responsibility is compatible with determinism. But you can kind of think of those two kind of lumped together, at least for our purposes here. Whereas on the other side of the view, it's that freedom is not compatible with determinism, and that's where many people will locate this principle of alternative possibilities, right? Because if you're not determined, the thinking goes, then you have more than one option available to you, right? And so you could become a philosopher, or you could become a historian, and those are two genuine live options, and nothing is determining you to do the one versus the other. And that's the kind of framework that has to be present in order for you to be truly free on this sort of a view. And it's that view. So the reason that I worry about that view as it relates to something like a doctrine like original sin is if you're a compatibilist, and you can be determined to do things freely, and you can be morally responsible for what you were determined to do, then it's not that big of a problem to say that you're responsible for original sin. Like, thinking about original sin on a compatibilist line isn't all that interesting. And so it's those types of people, though, aren't likely to use a free will defense anyways, right? So the people who use a free will defense to the problem of evil are people who think that whenever we think about why there is evil in a world that was created by God, who is loving and powerful and knowledgeable, why is there evil in a world that's created by a being like that? The people that use a free will defense, or what they're saying is, there's something about human persons having this free will that justifies the possibility for evil. And so most compatibilists, I say most because there is one exception, but most compatibilists just don't have any interest in the free will defense at all, because the free will defense makes use of this libertarian notion of freedom. Right. And if you're a compatibilist, you think that libertarian notion of freedom is wrong.
Let's hold off for a sec. Let's go back to what the problem of evil is.
Yeah,
I think that might be really good for us to kind of start there, and then we'll come back around on original sin.
So
the problem of evil is it's typically, do you mean it to be a challenge from what could be used from an unbeliever, but it could also be someone that's a believer that's just wondering, how is it that there's a God that cares for us and loves us and created us for a purpose, and yet there's all sorts of evil and horrible things going on. I don't know how you cash out. There's different ways to cash it out, but what's the problem of evil?
Yeah. So there really are problems of evil. Like that's really the best way of thinking about it. And so just thinking at it in the broadest categories, one would be sort of what you might call an existential or experiential, maybe, or even religious problem. And that's the kind of problem that you might say, like, why is this happening to me? Or why would God allow this to happen to me or to my family member? And the kind of response to that type of problem, the way I think about it, and this is something that the really well-known Christian philosopher Alvin Plantinga points out, they're actually calling for more of a pastoral type of a response, not a philosophical treatise. You might help them through that in a different sort of way. So that's one sort of thing. Whenever my father was diagnosed with cancer, that was the initial sort of thinking that I had. It's like, why would this happen to me or to my dad or to, whereas
the appropriate response would be empathy, soothing, being with the person, companionship,
that's right,
that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it.
Not here's an argument and let me write on the chalkboard.
Yeah. So whenever I tell my students, whenever we go through this, I say, now, this is a philosophy course. And so I don't think philosophy is the best help for that, at least not initially. I think it can be later on, but at least not initially. And so we're going to look at this other broad category, which I think of as just a philosophical problem of evil. And what you're doing there is you're trying to wrestle with the existence of God and the existence of evil in general. There's even that kind of question, though, has appeared in a couple of different ways. And from, I would say, Augustine to, I think this is Michael Murray makes this point. I can't remember in which book, but from Augustine to somewhere like up to Leibniz, the way that people often thought about evil and God, it was more of like a puzzle. Like, okay, we know that there is a God. So given God's existence, how do we fit evil within it? Right. So a parallel that you might think about it is, I remember when I was in a youth group in high school, me and my buddies, we'd come back to the house or sitting in the backyard and we would start talking. And, we'd often end up talking about how.
This is Oklahoma.
Yeah. Back in Oklahoma days, we'd say, how, if God has, if God is omniscient, if he knows all things, and how am I free? Like, so we'd look at like free will. How does free will fit within God's omniscience? But it was never a question of, well, given that I'm free, maybe God doesn't exist. It was more of a puzzle. Like, we know that God exists and he has these attributes. So how do we understand free will in light of that? And from Augustine to around Leibniz, that's often how people treated the existence of evil. Is we know that God exists. So how do we understand evil within that understanding of God's existence? And then, like, kind of probably most famously starting with Hume, it shifted. Instead of, given God, how can there be evil? It was more of, well, given evil, how could there even be a God at all? And so it kind of flipped the ordering of how you approach it.
Do you think that ordering matters?
Well, I do.
Okay.
But only in a limited sense, because I think even if you approach it in this second way, given evil, how can there be a God? I think you can still answer the question. I don't think that how you approach it, it's not as if the question is being begged against God's existence by asking it in that sort of way. And so I think you can actually deal with the problem. But
you're talking about strict logical possibility now. You're talking about, square, circle, how they can't possibly be together.
So within this,
or be the same, I guess.
This sort of existential problem of evil, and then this philosophical problem of evil. Within that, there's two broad categories. And one is the logical problem of evil. And that's what you're asking there. Is God and evil?
Okay. You hadn't gone there yet, right?
No, yeah.
Okay,
So that was
gotcha.
what you're addressing there is there are some people say, look, you have a square and you have a circle. If you have the one, you can't have the other, it just, the law of non-contradiction.
They're not the same,
yeah. Is God and evil like that? Is it that kind of a problem? Where if you know that God exists, you also know there can be no evil and vice versa.
Right.
That's sort of the logical problem of evil.
So the contradiction would be something like the God, once you figure out what that is the kind of being that wouldn't allow evil.
Yeah.
And yet we live in a world where it does allow evil. So
yeah.
So there's a logical conflict there.
Yeah, and the idea
God created the world.
Yeah, the idea is that like if a being is worthy of the title God, like there's going to be something about being worthy of worship and what goes into what kind of a being is truly worthy of worship. Not like I worship that athlete or something like that, but like true genuine religious devotion.
Yeah.
A being that's worthy of that would
someone
be
who would really take a knee for God.
Yeah. A being like that, it would be a being that is, loving and powerful and knowledgeable. And you you can sort of unpack in this concept of God, these traditional attributes that we ascribe to God, his omniscience and his omnipotence and his omnibenevolence, if you want to just stick with the omnis there.
Mm-hmm.
But then as soon as you have that picture of God, the concern is, well, that kind of a God. So the way that this shows up in Hume's dialogues is, like if God is omnipotent, he would be able to get rid of evil. If he's omniscient, he would know how. And if he's omnibenevolent, he would want to, so whence then evil, where does it come from then? And that's the sort of the crux of the issue, is that the attributes of God, when you have them all together, seem to give you a way of trying to understand, or a way of understanding these attributes results seemingly in there wouldn't be any evil, but there is evil, right? And so that's so that's the logical problem.
Mm-hmm.
The evidential problem would be the second broad category under this philosophical category. The evidential problem is a little bit more limited. We can talk about why this is the case, but most people, I would say, think that the logical problem of evil has failed, that it's not, nobody has successfully established that God and evil are logically incompatible in that way. And, but there are many who are more optimistic that the evidential problem of evil succeeds. And so what the evidential problem does is it says, look, the argument from a person advocating this type of a problem would say, I'm not saying that they're logically incompatible. I'm just saying that it sure seems far less likely that there would be a God, given that there's all of this evil, right? So that somehow or another, the presence of evil lowers our confidence, or it makes it less likely that God exists. And so
less likely, as opposed to most certainly not. Like the logical problem of evil means if there is evil, that precludes God, like 100%.
That's
so
it.
This is saying not 100%. We can't quite say that. That's overstating it, but probably there would be no God if there's
the way
evil.
that many times it'll cash out is they'll say, we know that there is evil because we look around and we see it all over the place, and we'd say evil's existence is more likely on naturalism, right, than it is on theism, right? So if there is evil,
what's naturalism mean?
So naturalism is the thesis that the natural world is all that there is all that exists. So there are no, as one philosopher put it, there are no spooks. There's no, you wouldn't have souls or angels or divine entities. You have the natural realm, the natural world, and it operates according to the various laws of nature. No God. Nothing supernatural. Yeah.
Okay. So when you say evil's more likely on naturalism than on theism. That's a way of saying the atheist is more likely to be correct than the person that believes in God.
Yeah, because when you look at evil, so some people will put it this way, like in a world that operates according to only naturalistic principles, the occurrence of evil would not be as surprising as it would be if it were created by a benevolent, omniscient, omnipotent God. It's you find evil's existence given God far more surprising than given not God.
Awesome.
So there's the literature is immense on both of these different kinds of problems, but I think these are rough approximations of what's generally separating out the evidential versus the logical problems.
Hold on one sec. And we're back. Sorry. Okay.
That's all right.
You were saying.
Yeah. So whenever we think about the problem of evil, and philosophically, we have these two broad categorizations. That there's that logical problem and that evidential problem.
Right.
I think that a general consensus is that the logical problem of evil has failed. It's such a bold claim. Like it's really easy to think about why squares and circles aren't the same thing. And if you know something's a square, you automatically know that it's not a circle. But it's not quite as easy to make such a claim about God and evil, that the concepts involved in God and in the term God and the term evil contradict each other in that sort of logical way.
So that's bad for atheism, right? It's not bad for Christianity.
Well,
but what I'm saying is the logical problem failing, that's code for the atheist lost that round.
Yeah, it's not a successful argument against God's existence.
Insofar as, okay, gotcha.
Yeah. So, but it doesn't mean that atheism is false. It just means that argument for it fails, right? So like, if somebody shows there's a flaw in an argument for God's existence, that doesn't mean that theism is false. It just means that argument doesn't work. And I think that's kind of where we're at with the logical problem.
Gotcha. So yeah, it's like Creed and Rocky are fighting, and you're not sure, is it Rocky 1 or is it Rocky 2? Rocky 1, of course, it looks like Creed is winning, and of course he does win.
Right.
So we're not saying that we can't tell quite who wins yet. Like, is it Rocky 1 or is it Rocky 2? Gotcha.
Yeah. Okay. That's it. Now, with the evidential argument, so one of the things that I think is really helpful for a lot of my students is that whenever the bolder your argument is, the bolder your claim is, you accomplish more if you can establish it, but it's also easier to show that it's false because it's such a bold claim. And so if you make this is, I can't remember which paper it's in, but my advisor, Linda Zagzebski, in one of her papers, I think she does this in several of them actually, but she'll say, here's an argument for some particular conclusion, and the premises get us to that conclusion, but I could actually go back and weaken a premise. Like, this premise is stronger than it needs to be. And so she'll weaken the premise and she can still get to the conclusion. And so the weaker premise, if you can weaken the premises, but still get to the conclusion, that's actually a better argument overall because it's harder to defeat.
It's counterintuitive because when you say the word weaken, we think, oh, that makes the argument a worse argument because it's weaker. But it's actually the argument is as strong as it is hard to respond to.
That's right. That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. So I don't know if you've ever seen the show Flight of the Conchords. Have you ever heard of this? It was on HBO.
I've heard of it.
It's like a comedy show. And one of their episodes, it's two musicians and they start singing the song. And the main part of the song, it's singing to this girl and he says, "You're the most beautiful girl in the room." And later he says, "You're the most beautiful woman on the street." And then the other guy says, "Well, depending on the street." Right? And so, like, if you tell someone you're the most beautiful woman in the world, well, that's a great claim. Like, and I'm sure it makes them feel good, but it's easier to defeat it by finding any one person, any in the world who's more beautiful, then it's false. But if it's just the most beautiful woman on the street, and even depending on the street,
right.
well, now that's it. It's a weaker claim, but because it's weaker, it's harder to falsify. So as long as you can get to your conclusion at the weaker claim, then it's a better argument.
It's all or nothing. If you say that this evil totally precludes God, well, if there's actually any hole in that, then it totally fails, because you're saying 100%.
Yeah, and that's what many people think that the free will defense has done, is the free will defense, and we don't need to get in all the nitty-gritty.
You're in the logical problem for your dissertation. Okay.
Yes, with this, a caveat we can come back to a little bit later, but at least for this, what the free will defense says is that there might be goods that emerge or that are able to be had because people have this libertarian understanding of free will. That they have libertarian freedom, and that libertarian freedom allows for the obtaining of certain goods. Well, if that's even possible, if that what we said there, even if it's not like actually true, if it's even like conceptually possible to be true, then that means that if it were true, you would have a way of understanding how God and evil could coexist, could be present together. And so it's the free will defender is making a really weak claim whenever they say, look, I'm not saying we actually have this libertarian freedom. I'm just saying it's possible that we have libertarian freedom. And if we have this libertarian freedom, if it's possible that it will allow for these certain goods, that's enough to show that there is evil, that evil and God could coexist.
Right.
So in this book here, this is an interesting book in that it's
I'm sharing a PDF of your book for those watching. For those who are listening, you'll have to go to the YouTube version of that, provided we don't get censored by YouTube.
With our lead-in conversation, maybe they'll censor us there.
One of my videos got taken down because the guy, I can't say the word because I think it's a bot that picks up the words. But in 3 hours of conversation, this is the producer of The Shack. He actually published the book The Shack, sold 22 million copies.
Wow.
He just happened to share his view on an electoral process that happened recently. He didn't say what year, he didn't say what office, and he used a criminal term, starts with F, usually used with banking and white collar stuff.
Right.
And he used EF and he used those twice, and they took the video down. They said it was misinformation. I appealed a couple weeks later, they put it back up, but it's just kind of a point. It's just kind of it's a hassle. So you have this book, it's called
Explaining Evil.
Four Views. What a great title. I love that.
Yeah. So this book is actually, it's kind of funny. This book is one of the things I say in the introduction is that this is not a book on the problem of evil, but it's related to the problem of evil. And so the way we've even been talking about the problem of evil so far is it sort of has this this feel to it where we say, all right, so we believe in God, and then we look around and we see there is evil, and we say, well, that evil causes a problem for God's existence. How do you understand it? And that's fine. That's a fair enough question to ask, and I think it's worth asking. That's why we've been talking about it. But what often gets missed is the atheist is never responsible. They never have to say, well, how do they explain evil on their view? On atheism, you still want to know, why is there evil? And so what I've done in this book is the first two people you just saw on the screen there, Richard Davis, my colleague at Tyndale, and Paul Helm are both Christian philosophers. Richard Davis is a libertarian. He and I share many of our similar views on that. And Paul Helm is a compatibilist. You see, he's got books on Calvin. And so he's working for more of a deterministic understanding of things. But then, so they wrote two of their chapters. Basically, the task was, given your understanding of reality, how do you explain evil? And the last two authors, though, are actually prominent atheists. Michael Roos and Eric Wielenberg are both atheist philosophers. And I wanted them to have an opportunity to say, well, look, I don't think there's a God, but how do I understand evil's existence given my atheism? Right? Because many, I think many apologists and a lot of Christian philosophers will argue that they'll sort of thinking about what some people call a moral argument for God's existence, right? Like if there is no God, then you can't make sense of evil at all, right? Because you sort of need some kind of a theism or theistic understanding in order to make sense of terms like evil or morality in general. Well, both Roos and Wielenberg, they disagree with that. And so it's, well, given that, given your understanding, how do you, so it was a really helpful process to go through it and to see for both Davis and Helm, their chapter wasn't focused around, well, how do I respond to this problem? It was more of it was actually their opportunity to address the problem in that first version that I talked about. Given my understanding of God, how does evil fit within that picture? That sort of puzzle approach to thinking about the problem.
Right.
And what I've noticed is that in a lot of the literature about the problem of evil, what often happens is somebody says, you believe in a God of this sort, here's a problem for evil. And then a theist says, well, here's how I can reconcile the problem. And then the atheist comes along and says, well, here's problems with your way of reconciling it. And then it's, well, here's problems with your problems with my way of reconciling it. And what gets missed is why we actually think there is evil. And so the idea with this book was to actually just stick with those explanations of why there is evil in general, and to have an opportunity for the atheist to put their positive explanation of evil on the table and let it be open to critique from others. And so it was a really enjoyable book, a really enjoyable process. And I certainly learned a lot, especially about from Roos and Wielenberg on how they want to give an account for evil, given their worldview. But another thing that often comes up whenever we were sort of doing a taxonomy of evil. And so we said, there's the logical problem and you worry about the free will defense. And one of the common critiques or common responses was, I say, well, that let's say that having free will does enable certain goods to be brought about, but it also allows for the possibility of there being evil. Somebody might say, okay, well, fine, but what about what philosophers call all of this natural evil? Right. So oftentimes in the debate, there's another set of distinctions. We've done a lot of distinctions. You got to
define evil.
So
what is evil?
Well, what many philosophers have done, at least, let me change that. What many philosophers of religion have done has sort of just been to point at examples. And so here's an atrocity, or if that was something that, say, there was some act of genocide, right? So you have moral agents who are engaged in intentional harm and death, destruction, that sort of thing. They'd say, well, that's moral evil. But not all evils are like that, they would say. And they said some, like you think about whenever, say, the tsunami hit Japan, right? And there was a lot of loss of life. And they'd say, well, that you have the suffering that comes from natural causes. It wasn't, a person didn't decide to start a tsunami, right? It was a natural event. So they would call that a natural evil. Well, it's not super clear how the free will defense relates to natural evils. Right. Now, one famous way of doing it is to say, again, because the free will defender is making a really minimal claim. They're just saying this has to, if it's even possible, that's enough to show that the logical problem fails. Right? Because the logical problem is so strong, you can take even a really minimal claim like possibility could be enough to defeat it. And so what they've said is, this comes up in Alvin Plantinga. He says, well, it could be
what you're saying there, just on that point about the weaker the claim, the easier it is to defend, the harder it is to defeat it. That's agreed on by everybody, right? There is no disagreement about that whatsoever. So if you're having a hard time with that, it's just you're missing maybe a logical piece or something about how logical arguments work.
None of the debates will come down to questions about that aspect, because it's just really it's just,
I think that's important.
Think about this. Which claim would be harder to defend?
Yeah.
All cats are white, or some cats are white, right? Like
Right.
you don't want to be stuck defending all cats are white. That's a really strong, bold claim that's super easy to defend.
Yeah.
But if you're defending some cats are white, well, that's going to be actually much easier. So if your argument,
that's a weaker claim.
That's the weaker claim.
Weaker claim. So it's actually stronger.
If you can get to your conclusion,
yeah,
with some cats are white, use that one, right?
Yeah, gotcha.
Right. And so the whenever you say that God and evil are logically incompatible, it's more in the all cats are white camp. It allows for no exceptions.
Yeah.
Right. There are no exceptions. There's no
high bar.
And so if you can find one even possible counterexample, like just one little tiny thing that shows, well, in this case, they could coexist.
Well, Genesis 3 fails. Genesis, it's right there at the very beginning of the Bible. Whoever was writing Genesis, I don't know if they had the problem of evil in mind, but Genesis 3 is right there. God exists, and look, there's some evil right there, and nobody thought that's a contradiction.
I often think this is a point that is overlooked by many in the discussion, is that it's not like Christians have this received revelation and they read through it, and then when they're done, they then look around and get surprised by evil's existence.
No, not at all.
Right. It's like right there in the book. Like it's
right up front.
Yeah. Like right from the beginning, it's
Genesis 4,
we've been dealing with
murder.
it from. That's right. And so I kind of, it's interesting. So going back to, remember we're saying, like, people might say, well, evil is surprising on theism, but it's not surprising on naturalism. Well, evil is not very surprising on Christian theism, given that Christian theism is centered around a solution to evil.
If it was if it was the logical contradiction, it would be surprising that I didn't notice it when I was reading Genesis 3 and 4.
Yeah, that's right. So, but going back to this, the natural and moral evil issues, I see why. So if you say, well, maybe non-human agents are responsible for natural evils. So maybe no human person caused a tsunami, but maybe there was a demon that caused it. Well, that's possible. Like, I don't think there's any something logically impossible about that. And so in some sense you could extend that, but I don't think that's going to be very convincing to many people. One of the things that emerged in my own mind as I was working on the book explaining evil is that I'm actually now increasingly convinced that there is no natural evil, that it's been a mistake for philosophers of religion to talk about natural evil versus moral evil. Whenever I instead, so what
is kind of an equivocation. The spelling is spelling is the same. That's what makes it so tricky.
Yeah. So do you know John?
Kind of like you're calling something candy, and it's not really candy. It's spelled the same, but it's like like baked potato or something.
Right. Are you familiar with the philosopher John Keeks? He's
how
got
do you spell the last name?
Keks. So this is the book I'm thinking of.
I haven't seen it. No.
So I thought you maybe you're right, because I just recently learned that he does work in political philosophy as well, and so he's got a case for conservatism and a case against liberalism. So I just got these recently, so I haven't read them yet. But
do they have any pictures in them?
No pictures.
Okay. That's probably why I don't have them yet.
So in this book, though, he gives a definition of, so it's called The Roots of Evil, and he gives a definition of evil, and I won't take the time to read it to you, but it basically says, here are the necessary sufficient conditions for something being evil. It causes significant harm, and the person engaging in the action had a malevolent motivation and no justifying reason. Okay, so significant harm, malevolent motivation, and no justifying reason. There's another philosopher who works on the topic of evil. His name's Todd Calder, and he's really great. And the way he has two main conditions: causing significant harm without an excusable intention. Okay. Right. So there's no justifying reason for it.
In other words, conditions that are not met by a host of firearms violations in Canada.
yeah. That too. Initially, where I thought you were going was those aren't met
or California
or
California.
Yeah. Those conditions aren't met whenever you have a tornado sweeping through a neighborhood or a tsunami hitting.
That's where I was going. I had to stop at the firearms commentary first, and then I was going to the tornado.
So it just occurred to me that as I was working on the introduction for that book, I read a whole bunch of philosophers.
Hold on one sec. Keek says significant harm. What were the other two?
Malevolent motivation.
Okay.
No justifying reason.
In other words, mens rea.
Yeah.
And then no justification.
Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay. Thanks.
And I kind of think, so there have been people who've quibbled with his definition, and
those are necessary conditions that
he thinks those are necessarily and jointly sufficient.
Okay.
But if you think about, I'm not sure. Well, there's reasons you might quibble about that. Calder's definition is more succinct. He just says significant harm, no justification for it, right? I think he says an inexcusable intent. So it's inexcusable intention. Mm-hmm. But those don't occur whenever you look at the world around us at what has been called natural evils. And the reason I think this is important to point out is almost all philosophers that I'm aware of who work on, not philosophers of religion, but just philosophers who work on the concept evil, all of their definitions are of this sort. Like, they're all going to quibble with each other and fight it out and stuff like that, but they're of that kind. And I couldn't find any that would apply in any straightforward way to what has been called natural evils.
Gotcha.
And so what had occurred to me is, if we drop this category of natural evil, it's not that Christians won't have to give some reason or some account for how God could allow that kind of suffering. I'm not saying there is no natural evil, so we don't have to worry about it. If we stop calling it evil, it might make it the case that we see more easily that our answers to that question will be different. That what we've been trying to do is take solutions to moral evil and sort of shoehorn them into the problem of natural evil. Mm-hmm. But if there is no natural evil, if it's just I think in the book I call it, I didn't have a very creative brain for coming up with terms. So I think I just called it nature-based suffering, right?
It's unfortunate things that happen that are usually attributed to so-called natural events.
Yeah.
Acts of God. Actually, they're in the law. They're oftentimes called acts of God.
Yeah,
that's the ironic thing about that.
That is interesting. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that in a while. But if we carve those off
for insurance purposes, I think they're called acts of God oftentimes in our heritage.
Yeah.
But sorry.
Yeah. Especially if they're trying to avoid paying you. We don't cover you if it is an act of God.
Fine print.
Yeah. But if we carve that off and say those just aren't evil, then maybe we don't have to try to shoehorn, say, a free will defense into explaining those things.
That makes sense.
And then
that makes a lot of sense to me, actually.
This is
because there is equivocation there. It is equivocation.
Yeah. And I really think so.
Can I push back on that? Can I?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Let me pretend to be the atheist. Okay. So if I'm channeling my inner atheist here from the Adamic sin that I've inherited, perhaps, I don't know, but some kind of original sin. So I'm now the inner atheist here is coming out. What if I just said, well, Paul, you're kind of begging the question because you're just basically defining all evil in terms of just one type.
Yeah.
And you're just saying, well, of course, that you just gave the definition of moral evil. Yeah. That's what you did.
Right.
And then you say, oh, well, there's no natural evil. Yeah. Well, but that's just, it's begging the question.
I think how I would respond is I would say, if by my doing that, you think I'm saying that nature-based suffering isn't a problem, then I just haven't explained myself very well. Like, because what the atheist, a smart atheist would do is they would say, okay, well, God is omnipotent, omniscient, and wholly good. And there are examples of suffering that is based on nature, non-human agent-based suffering. So they would just revise the problem. And I'm actually, I think that would be perfectly okay to do that. But what we would have now is a problem of evil that gets one kind of a solution, and then a problem of suffering that results from natural occurrences that may need an entirely different kind of solution for. And what I see is the problem is that we've been trying to take this solution to the moral evil and apply it to this other category. And I don't think it fits very well.
We're stuck with demons, which, I mean, if you're a Christian, we do believe they exist. I mean, you can't read the Gospels without seeing Jesus respond to demons. But.
So I think that it's they're separate problems, and maybe in places the solutions will overlap, but they may not overlap in places as well. And so it's sort of saying, it's not that I'm saying this isn't a problem. I'm saying it's a different problem. And so don't expect my solution to the moral evil problem to automatically apply to the natural based suffering problem. That's that kind of the direction I'm going. Now this is part of some of the work that I'm hoping to still do, is to go through and think more about what a solution to this kind of problem, the suffering that results from natural causes, like what might that look like, and how much is there overlap between traditional solutions to the problem of evil or not? That's sort of things that I'm hoping to work on going forward. But at least initially, I think it can help us think more clearly about what it is that we really take to be the problem of evil, or the problem of, like, so some people are really bothered by, a massive earthquake resulting in lots and lots of loss of life. Well, let's think about a solution for that problem, and without having to shoehorn it into a solution to a different problem.
That makes a lot of sense. And it would be, I've always been, I'm glad you're saying this, because kind of makes me feel better about some thoughts I've had for a long time about, it is odd that we use the same spelling two different ways, and they just they both happen to be objections to. It just seems like an odd coincidence there.
Now, to be fair,
I think we're talking about two different words, actually.
I think now what some people will do is they will frame the whole issue as a problem of suffering, and they'll say, suffering could be caused by lots of different things, moral agents, non-moral agents, but the problem is really just a problem of suffering. But I still think my point would
unjustified suffering, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well, some of them think it's just any suffering, but
prima facie. Okay.
But I still think even if you frame it that way, you might say, well, some suffering is caused by moral agents, and here's how I would deal with that. Some suffering is caused by non-moral agents, and here's how I would deal with that. So I still think my approach would work, but I'm just trying to, give a fair shake to those who think about it as in one sort of way.
Well, if someone was to come to this topic for the first time and just start at the beginning, where would you suggest that they start? Like let's say that they didn't have a good philosophy professor in college, and they're looking and they're like, well, where do I go from here? How do I how do I get caught up?
Here is a book from Jeremy Evans called The Problem of Evil. And the subtitle is The Challenge to Essential Christian Beliefs. I think this is a really good place to start. There's an even simpler book, and I don't know if I have a copy here. It might be in my office. I'm just trying to see it so I could at least show it to your those watching on YouTube. But it's by Norm Geisler, and I think it's called Why Evil? I can't remember the exact name. The only caveat I make, it's a good book. It's a good general overview, but there is a formal logical fallacy in one of the early chapters, but don't let that dissuade the reader. He kind of made a bit of a mistake there, but it's
an editing mistake, or is it an author mistake?
I don't think it's that. I'm not sure what happened, but it's funny is he phrases the problem and then a solution in a certain way that is is trying to make sure I get it. I think he affirms the consequent. No, I think he I can't remember if he affirms the consequent or if he denies the antecedent, but
those are deductive. Those are basic deductive fallacies.
But what's funny is in his critical reasoning book, he has a book on critical reasoning, and he actually uses almost the same wording in his critical reasoning book as an example of a fallacy. So it's like he knew it at one point. He just kind of got a little bit
of course he
loose.
knows it. You can't get a PhD in philosophy without.
So, but it's I mean, it's a minor issue, and the book is very easy introduction. It's not simplistic, but it's a good introduction. But this one is really, it's probably a little bit weightier, but I recommend that as well.
All right. Can you mind if we ask you a few questions about your process, your writing process, and your just academic wise?
Yeah.
Are you a morning person? Do you get up early?
Ever since I've had kids, yes, I've been definitely a morning person.
but not naturally.
Yeah, but not, well, I mean, it kind of come and go, but just now my mornings I've never been one to write in the mornings. Like some guys hop up and they get right at it, especially with kids on the in the view, like, you have breakfasts to get and school lunches to pack and fighting to manage and all sorts of things.
What's a typical day look like for you? What time do you get up and what do you have for breakfast and what kind do you have coffee?
6:37. Yeah, get the coffee going pretty early. I will say, thankfully, my oldest is now capable of cooking breakfast for himself and his brothers, so he'll do eggs and toast for him and his brothers, which is helpful. But the kids are off to school, 8:30, and then I'm back, back in the office. I usually do most drop-offs in the morning because my wife has a lot of meetings with her work.
Do you have breakfast in the morning? You didn't mention breakfast.
Not usually. No breakfast, I did today just because I thought we might go over the lunch hour, and so I did have some eggs and toast for breakfast today.
But you don't normally? How come? You just are not hungry, or is it a diet thing?
It's a little bit of both. I'm often not super hungry, and I often will do some it's called intermittent fasting. Stop eating around 7 o'clock at night, and then I try to go until lunch the next day.
So you're bragging right now, like a Pharisee, is what you're saying?
Yeah,
that's you're bragging. Yeah. How old?
Yeah, I always tell my students that if you're fasting to lose weight, I'm not sure you're actually biblically fasting. Like you're kind of supposed to be doing something else. You're just on a diet. You're not actually fasting, but yeah, so I'm usually back, ready to go around 9-ish, where I'm either in starting up classes or doing emails or writing. And then usually it's the more meatier part of midday to mid-afternoon is where I do more stuff that requires a bit more serious thought. So I'll try to do an hour-ish or so of more mundane tasks of like email, that sort of stuff.
You do that before you do the heavy stuff?
Yeah, usually just to kind of triage. Sometimes it's just checking to make sure there's nothing that's super pressing or a deadline that I forgot that I needed to send us, a letter of reference off or something like that. Make sure I haven't, skipped over any of that sort of stuff. And then, 10:30-ish is whenever I'll start in on, some either reading, or writing, kind of depending on what the day calls for. As I'm sure you remember, a lot of times it's both, reading for a bit and writing and then reading and then writing.
And then do you stay up late at all working at projects if you have a book?
It comes and goes. So, for this book project, there was more of the staying up late. So usually, I remember one of our professors, Scott Ray, before I went to start my PhD program, he said, look, you have to remember your wife is going to a place that she doesn't know anyone, and she's going to be working all day and you're going to be working all day. And if you come home and you're in the books all night, she's going to be miserable. And so he really encouraged me to try to structure my writing and, those is kind of an 8 to 5-ish sort of a thing, so that whenever she's off work, I could spend time with her. And that's something I really tried to internalize. And it's something that for the most part has carried over. And so, the end of the day comes a little bit sooner because the kids come home from school, and that kind of interrupts your thinking and things like that. But so if I've got a major project I'm trying to finish, usually, 4-ish, we'll be with the kids, and then we'll go do dinner. And then after dinner, I'll, or the kids are winding down, ready for bed, I'll hop in back in the office for, another, hour or two or something like that. Just again, kind of depending on that. But I really try to leave the early evening dinner time with family. It's whenever we are, still are able to eat together as a family. I know as schedules get busier with sports and things like that, that gets harder and harder, but we really try to take advantage of that as a good family time.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah. And then in most times, I'm able to just spend the rest of the evening with my wife. But if there's a pressing project or something like that, then I'll pop in for that. But I really try not to make it an ongoing habit, just because I want to spend appropriate time with her as well.
Christian schools are notorious for underpaying faculty. Are you guys able to make it up there? You get enough money?
Yeah, I mean,
sounds like kind of an expensive place to live.
It is a very expensive place. And so I live in a very modest house. Like I said, my 3 boys live together. They are all in one room that's about 10 by 11 and three beds in a little tiny room, because I needed an office. So it's not an exorbitant house, but my next door neighbor just listed his house for 1.25 million. And so that's why we are renters, because we just have not been able to. So the housing market here is much more closer to LA sort of thing. Yeah. But like there's different people are in, we sort of just came here at the wrong time, and so it was just never able to, like, the market went kind of crazy. But Tyndale, it's a private school, so that doesn't get, have public funding of any sort. And so, there's limits to what they're able to do. But I do feel like, especially over the last several years, they've really done their best. They're not, I think some schools use their being private as an excuse to underpay, instead of like, for some schools, it's just the reason, like they just don't have the money, and others, like, they could, but they use it as an excuse. And I feel like, especially over the last several years, that Tyndale has really, you'd be very fair to say, it's more of the reason, like, it's just, there's limited funds, and so, and it's fair. Thankfully, my wife, she works at a public school. It's what we would call a community college, like in the States. Here, it's just it's just a college system, but it's more vocational training. And so, she's I don't think there's been a year in our marriage where I've made more money than my wife. I don't think I've ever made more than her.
Okay. So together you're able to cobble together enough.
Yeah. It works. We're able to do it. But yeah, she's full-time. She's doing really well in her. It's funny. I always tease her, like, every time she starts at a new job, at a new company, she's there for like 6 months or so, and then they create a new position for her to take, because like, oh, she would be perfect to do this.
That's a high compliment to her.
So yeah. So she's been great. And that's part of what makes being here, her family's all in California. Mine's now they're all in Texas, or my immediate family.
All my exes live in Texas. Every time I'm there, I'm like, you live here?
Yeah. It's a good song.
There should be a song too.
Yeah, there's somebody should get on that.
I would say there is one exception to the private school thing, is Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles. Well, actually, where Linda Zabzepski was there for a while. I didn't overlap with her there, but she still has a nice.
I think that was the early '90s. I think
I met her there one time. She came back and visited, and she seemed like she's pleasant. She's a Christian, right? She's
a Catholic philosopher.
She's still Christian. Okay.
Yes, she, I believe, is. Oh yeah. So
she's not a total pagan.
So this is her first book, Dilemma, Freedom, and Foreknowledge, and it came out when she was so kind of
at Loyola.
Yeah, so that's kind of the 90s hairstyle there. So associate professor at Loyola. Yeah, so she's fantastic. She's actually so I'm the current president of the Canadian Society of Christian Philosophers, and so we have a conference coming up in a couple of weeks, and she's going to be our keynote speaker for it.
Cool!
I was really glad to have her.
She still returns your emails then?
Yeah, she does. She's quite kind that way.
That's awesome. She seemed really nice when I met her. I think I said maybe 2 words to her or something like that,
Okay.
like, "Hi, Linda."
Yeah, right. So
But
I wrote the bulk of my dissertation from Toronto. Actually, I
oh,
hadn't
wow.
finished whenever I got the job opportunity, and so she was very accommodating. Whenever I would go back to visit my family in Oklahoma, she would basically just find a way to squeeze in some time to meet with me to talk about our, I'd send her a chapter and we meet and talk, and like she was just absolutely fantastic. How accommodating she was, overseeing the process of somebody writing a dissertation from afar.
That's
So
awesome.
she was great. Yeah, really great
That's
person,
awesome.
great advisor, amazing philosopher. So yeah, good person all around.
She's well known, that's for sure. She's
Yeah,
been around.
certainly. Yeah.
Well, Paul, we really, really appreciate you coming on and talking to us about what life is like in Canada as an academic. And it sounds in many ways delightful. Also walking us through a bit of the problem of evil, and
Yeah.
it's impressive how fast you're able to talk about it and how much you
Hopefully it
seem
wasn't
to
too
know
fast.
about it.
Sorry.
No, it's
Yeah.
it's obvious that you do this for a living. It's obvious that you enjoy it and are excited about it. It's infectious, and we appreciate all of the insight you've given us, including the helpful tips about how to get started if we're just now looking at this. So we appreciate you coming on, Dr.
Well,
Paul
and
Franks. Yeah,
if anybody wants to reach out, if they have questions, I'm happy to
sure.
do my best to
We'll
can.
link your setup there at the school, and anything else you
Yeah.
want us to link.
Yeah, that would be fine. And then
Okay.
I'm on Twitter as well. W Paul is my Twitter handle. I'm happy. I get a handful of questions on over Twitter every once in a while for people who have questions about the most recent one was about the problem of evil. So it
Okay.
always depends on how many are
Twitter.
coming in and what my time looks like. But I'm happy to help out or
Great.
give more direction to.
Okay.
It's a big question that people have a lot of questions about, but there are good
Yes.
answers to these questions, and so I'm happy to do what I can to facilitate people becoming aware of some of those answers to these.
Tell us your Twitter
questions.
handle again. It's at W Paul.
That's right. WPAUL.
5 letters. Okay, great.
That's it. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Paul.
All right. Yeah, no problem. Take care.